Welcome back, beautiful people. This is episode 73 of An Untold Narrative, where we host creators who are doing incredible things underground, aren't really well known, but known in their niche, don't have a blue check mark, but are worth talking about and have an unbelievable story. Today's guest is no different. He is James Costa of Clubhouse Archives, but has an incredible history, from what I understand, in the fashion and apparel space. You are an avid golfer, you are a family man, and you are an incredible entrepreneur from what I've watched from the background. You are another guest of mine who I've met just through the Internet of Things, and we get to come together to kind of have a conversation. So I'm super stoked to have you.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing me on. Look forward to talking a little bit about what you just mentioned, my history, and kind of what brought me into Web3 and here today. But yeah, just kind of super excited also to be on here with you. I know this is what your 73rd, you
Yeah,
said?
73.
Yeah, that's incredible, man. Congrats on that. That's consistency,
Thank
right?
you.
That's one of the keys. So that's awesome.
It's fluctuated. Trust me, there are some months where I just don't have the energy for it. But I've
Yeah.
been back at it lately, so I'm excited. Like, you were one of the people. I'm like, oh, this person would be super interesting to have on. So completely unlike a lot of our other guests. So we'll touch on photographers, videographers, footwear designers, obviously, because that's primarily who I know in my ecosystem. But we've had apparel before, not too many though. So I'm really excited, and obviously your journey is a little bit different. You mentioned before we started recording, you're based in Colorado. Have you always been there? Where'd you grow up? What's your history like?
No, yeah. So actually I was born and raised in Florida. Lived there for what 22, 23 years. From there moved to Atlanta, Georgia. Actually, I lived in Atlanta, Georgia for almost 6 years, and still to this day one of my favorite places in the country to live. I think I had such a great experience there. It was my first business out out of the gates in the apparel industry, which I've been in apparel now for 23 years. So that was where I kind of really understood the game, if you will, and learned so much about what I was doing and what the future of my career would be. Then
And
from Atlanta,
what was that first job in Atlanta?
so I started with a couple business partners, a denim line called Carpe Denim.
Oh, cool.
That would run for 10 years and would evolve into a full collection. So it became Carpe Clothiers. So it started as this men's and women's denim line and then grew into more of a lifestyle brand that inevitably would end due to the '08 financial crisis, the housing crisis.
Mm.
So that was kind of the beginning of the end for us, and it ran from 2000 to 2010. So in 2008, when that hit, those last 2 years were just really rough, and we inevitably closed it down. But then I moved to New York, and I was in New York for almost 5 years, where I worked for a couple different businesses. One of them was just a year or like a year and a half, and then the rest of it was at Jack's New York as their design director. And that was a pretty big company. I think when I left there, it was a $40 million business, and then the next year they went up to 80 actually. Uh,
Wow.
we doubled each year that I was there. It was crazy. It was an awesome experience.
So you, in your first two apparel and clothing ventures, you've really understood the grassroots of what it's like building a business, essentially.
Well, for the first 10 years as an entrepreneur, because it was our business and it was a startup, I mean, we were in our 20s at that point, right?
Yeah.
We went on the internet, found a business plan, and emulated that plan, recreated an entire deck and model based around the framework that we found, pitched that to friends, family, and some angels, and raised close to $250,000 at that time. The time that was something,
Yeah.
20 somethings. And then that's what kicked off that 10-year business. But the point of all that was because we were in charge of everything, we had to learn everything. So we hired a consultant that had worked for J. Crew for like 20 or 30 years. Like he was in the industry for a very long time, mainly as a developer. So he would take tech packs and concepts, and he would develop them into working samples, and then he would run production as well. So he really taught us everything that became the foundation of what I know today in development and production. I mean, that's it's funny, that's really where the product is made. Like that's
Mm.
really where the magic happens in terms of, and you know this, you can have a great design on paper, but if the developer is not great at what they do, then you're not going to get
It's
that.
going to look completely different.
Right. Like developers are the ones that are there with the fabrics. If they're not pre-selected, or if there's just a quality delivered to say, I'd like to get something like this, the developer is usually the individual that goes and finds um, the 5 options to say,
They
here's
are
really good. Yeah.
they are the unsung hero of, product creation, essentially.
They are. And if a developer is really, really good, then you typically get really, really great products. And sometimes, and like you said, it's the unsung hero, but it can also be the reason why sometimes brands aren't what they used to be, or
Right.
kind of change a bit in term, because it's really down to the individual that's developing the samples to get approved, right?
Mm.
So we learned that side of the business, and by all accounts, really got an education in an incredible way, and became students of the game. So when I went to New York, I ended up working for that Jack's New York company as their design director. And when he found out that I could create not only the designs but also create the tech packs, go over to Asia and run the development, because I'd been doing it for several years up to that point, I became that guy. And I ended up managing men's and women's, and we were running 75 styles per gender, not counting the SKUs and not counting colorways. So you're talking a couple hundred um, samples on both gender, right? And had their off-price business. So it was a task. I mean, I was getting up. I was getting up at 5. I still get up at 5 in the morning, but that's when I started that early in my career. I was getting up at 5 in the morning. I was sitting in my desk in Tribeca, typically around 6:30 to 7, somewhere in that, because the office, opened at 9, and I needed 2 hours before everybody showed up just to stay afloat,
Right.
because there's just so much.
That's like
And
the typical like New York hustle kind of
oh
story.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
if you really want to break through all of the noise of New York in fashion,
yeah,
like that's the energy you have to put forward.
sure. And it's that is the, well, it's funny, it is, but there was nobody else in the office at that time, so I was getting there earlier than most. Now at like 8 to 8:30, people would roll in, so there was your earlies. I was just early because I just
So
I was it
so
was my
why?
Hmm?
Why did you feel compelled to drive that and be devoted like that?
I really wanted to make an impact at the company, and I felt I loved what I honestly loved being in control of all that design.
Yeah.
And if you know anything about tech packs and about flats and about all that, it's just time consuming. At that time, it was very time consuming and very
Less
tedious.
automated.
We
For
weren't using a PLM. I was using all Illustrator and Photoshop, so I was creating tech packs, and that's time consuming.
hmm
We used to he wanted to see everything sampled, so the tech packs had to be really, really extensive, had a lot of colorways in them, and a lot of detail. And by and large, my job there specifically was to turn their business around, because they were shirt people when I came in, and I made them collection people. So we really transformed that business into a substantial contemporary brand. At that point, we were competing. Then we got back into department stores and hundreds of stores across the country. And then we developed a massive Costco business. And that was like, yeah, that's why they went from 40 to 80. So I helped them set that up. And then at the end of that tenure with that company, I had decided to go back out on my own.
Mm.
And I partnered up with Jared Cook from
Yeah.
a number of places. St. Louis. He was at New Orleans. He
New
was at
Orleans is what I know him from.
Packers. Inevitably went to the Chargers. He was the Raiders. Like he's, and it was awesome experience for me because I used to play ball, so I had a kind of an affinity to that still. But to have someone that was kind of similar in the sense where they were former, or he was a current, but just an athlete that had an affinity for fashion.
And so
Was
you started a bit of fashion business with
Oh
Jared?
yeah, so we started a label, co-founded a label. He already had the name. It's called Nifty Genius.
Okay.
It's still in existence. Nifty-genius.com. You can take a look at that. In fact, everything on there still. I designed um, all of the products there. They're still in business. I just left that business, sold my equity there to get into
Transition.
Web3. Right. That's when I learned about.
So so just to pause real quick, what year did you start Nifty Genius with Jared?
That was back in 2015. And at that time I was living in LA. So I had moved from New York to LA to open up the LA office for Jax. And in that transitional period, I had met Jared through a friend that was actually his business partner at the time, and it inevitably became our third partner. And he introduced us, and Jared, was telling me all about what he wanted to do, and they loved what I was doing at Jax, and they thought that it would be great to kind of partner up and have me run the design, the development of the same thing as I've been doing for almost at that point 15 plus years, now 23 years, and yeah, so we ran that biz together all the way up until COVID got tough. Obviously, it was
Yeah.
tough for everybody, but they are still in business. They made it through all the way up until I think I finally February of 21, which was not this February, but
Yeah,
the
it'll
one
be coming up on 2 years. Yeah.
yeah, is when I learned about NFTs. I was already invested in Ethereum. I was already invested in Bitcoin. I even had Polygon and Solana, and I'd started with XRP, and I should have made a lot of money off that. And they had that whole scandal, which was just crazy, because I was looking at that as like my long-term cash out. But yeah, so actually, funny enough, XRP is what got me into crypto, and then it expanded into all the other stuff. So I knew about blockchain for the most part, didn't really understand it fully because I just knew that it was
Of course.
kind of the future of at that point currency in a sense, right? At least some form of currency, not probably going to replace things, but and when my old it was the one of my old business partners with the denim line, his name's Greg Mike. He's this guy up here. He's actually a famous artist in the
So
space.
I was gonna ask you. I know Greg's work. I actually sat across from him at a Delta Lounge one time. He's good friends with one of my best friends, Che Anderson from Worcester, Mass, where I live.
Oh yeah, because Greg's family's up in Connecticut. Yeah, sure.
So yeah, very small. I saw the artwork behind you. So those watching on YouTube, definitely check it out. So Greg was your business partner.
So Greg, myself, and another partner, his name is Matthew Klein, were the original partners in Carpe Denim. We all went to Florida State University together. We were all in the same
Wow.
fraternity. I was older, and Matthew convinced me to start the denim line, and his friend Greg was a graphic designer, and I remember I walked into, that he was like, "Oh, we should bring Greg on as a partner," and I'm like, "Oh, I don't know, I don't do what would he do?" And then I think he made a business card for us one day. Like, just I walked in, he showed me kind of the design for the card or whatnot. It kind of clicked to me because I wasn't a graphic designer
Sure.
at that time. I didn't even know how to use Illustrator and Photoshop and any of that at that point. He actually was one of the ones that initially showed me how to use the program, and then I became a student of it, and it was over from there. But I looked at that and I said, okay, yeah, we can bring him on as a partner. He can be in charge of graphics and marketing, and you know how it is back then. It's like everybody's gonna do. It's like, you're our CMO. So
Yeah,
you know,
he's an incredibly talented artist. For those who
yeah, I
don't
was
know
gonna
his
say
work, just
he was always an artist though.
Yeah.
And he used to always say, it's funny to this day. I mean, he was consistently drawing in his books, and I wish I can get my hands on these pre Larry Loudmouth characters. I gotta have some somewhere. And he did a pretty good job though. It's funny, he really always knew he was gonna be an artist.
Wow.
He would only really sketch in his books. We had all these books that we would sketch in, like designs, which I still have. And the characters though he would keep to his books, and then the other stuff he would put in the other books. So I'd looked at one point, I'm like, I can't, there's got to be something somewhere. But it's interesting because he would always say that he wanted to be an artist. And when the 2008 thing hit, we actually owned two businesses together. We'd had Carpe Denim, actually three. I take that back. So we had an office in downtown Atlanta. We had Carpe Denim. We had an apparel trade show that we were running down in Miami Beach that became super successful. And then
Cool.
it was called Traffic, Trafik. And then we had CI Group, which was a consulting business. And we were working with TBS, Cartoon Network, Dallas Austin. We developed his Rowdy line and several other clients. But the point is after that all kind of ended, right? We disbanded and I moved up to New York. Matthew was already up there. He became this artist. He stayed in Atlanta. He's like, I'm gonna become an artist. I think 5 or 6 years later, he opened up ABV, which is an art
Yeah.
gallery in Atlanta, and has worked with Google and Facebook and
Everybody. I mean,
Heineken, and he just did a collaboration with Cause. Like he became this globally renowned artist, and I'm super proud of him. I mean,
and you got to start a business with him.
yeah. Well, it's funny. Well, he was one of the first people I went to for he is the one that informed me of NFTs because I asked him about a
Wow.
drop he had done.
There
This
you
is
go. Full
20 years.
circle.
Yeah. So he was like, oh, he explained it to me on the phone. And on the phone conversation is when I came up with the idea. I was like, I'm going to do this for clothing. Asked him a bunch of questions and just did a ton of research after that. It took me 6 months to develop the business model.
So
But
it's so funny because the business you guys started, it sounds like you just pulled the business model off Google.
yeah, well, that
There's
that was
none of that for NFTs. We're too early.
well, the business model for this though, for NFTs, was an actual business model. That was the difference. That was why it took me so long. When I looked at what he was doing, I mean, he's an artist, so he was selling his art, and I didn't want to do that. I probably should have. I mean, it's crazy how easily things sold back then, but that's not what I wanted to do. And when you're in a bull, you think that the bull's always going to be there. So I wasn't really.
I learned the hard way too.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking that way. I was but I was thinking, look, I was honestly thinking for the longevity of the business and for the holders. I was trying to figure out how do I actually give them value, and I came up with Clubhouse Archives, which I'd always had the name on the back burner. That was going to be my brand I was going to do in IRL for Web2, because I've always designed kind of a Ralph Lauren meets Supreme kind of aesthetic. That's just always
Totally.
been look kind of like the Ralph Lauren rugby look that Ralph used to have. And Clubhouse Archives for me was like, oh man, you could take all of the sports memorabilia throughout history back in the archives of all these clubhouses. And, if I was to go in the back of a clubhouse in their closet, like what are some of the old things I might find, pull out and remake them, like reinvent them. And that was the idea behind the brand. So initially this kind of started golf related and quickly expand. I was like, no, this just needs to be sportswear. It just needs to be more of that Ralph kind of a thing. Like I said, that meets Supreme, if you will. So I developed a membership NFT, and I said, okay, well, the NFT that we sell initially is just a membership into a fashion hub. That's where it landed today. Meaning you get into the ecosystem and think of it almost like a wholesale club, right? So in this fashion hub, you have the ability to have access to products, almost, yeah, I mean, somewhat near cost if you're a member, right? Whereas people outside of the space are going to pay full retail. So we've created like this, and the reason why I call it a fashion hub is because we also work B2B. So, we see ourselves as a resource for the space because fast forward, Web3's got this massive merch problem, right? We all know
Huge.
that. Yeah, it's like nobody can win because,
Nobody knows how to
they're tech
execute
companies,
it.
right? It's like we shouldn't blame them. If I want really good code written, I go to them. They should be coming to us if they want really good apparel and or footwear, right? So that's kind of the problem statement, and we saw ourselves as a solution, right? I'm using my 23 years experience to design, develop, and produce apparel at scale for the space. And that's really the underlying model when you look at it, right? You've got the B2B side and you've got the B2C side. So the B2B side is just a straight service where we can design, develop, produce, and we already have 10 brands now that we're working with. Um, and that continues to grow, right? Now on the B2C side, what's really interesting is I said, okay, well, what else could we offer the members? We're offering them the ability to actually vote on a uh, a site that we have built, right? We have this voting site on the collections, on the product development of the brand that we will create for the space.
Mm,
Because the label Clubhouse Archives will be kind of this Web3 agnostic brand. Will we have branded products? Sure, but that's not really what we're doing. So when you think of the terms, diamond hands and the HODL and not financial advice and those types of terms, that's something that anybody in Web3 could wear regardless of what community you're in, right?
100%.
Because that's just so think of us like that. So they're going to help develop that long term, but that's really the longer term play. The more immediate play is the fact that we're filling a void in the space.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
We're marketing print on demand.
it's 100% true. I mean, so many projects have come out with let's call it merch, screen printed hoodies or t-shirts, and just gotten absolutely destroyed by the people and the fans and the community of their project. But it's like, can you fault them because they don't have the resources, they don't understand that system, they don't know how to develop real tangible product. So
Right.
yeah, I mean, it makes a ton of sense. And from what I've been seeing, it sounds like what I really can appreciate is like you didn't rush right into it and you didn't like launch it and then you'd set people, because there have been other projects who have tried to do the physical to digital and have rushed into it, and then they leave everybody waiting because they're figuring it out on the fly, and then
Right.
they're making way more mistakes that way.
It's still going to take look, and our community's just been very patient. But I was very transparent with them from the beginning. I'm like, look, we're going to build a business, and
Mm,
this is going to take a couple years.
mm,
And that's how long it takes to build a business. Right. So um, that started with, for me anyway, with really setting up the team first. So I went
mm,
out and got some really incredible individuals. People that worked at Amazon and Google or Progressive and Nestle. In the case of our culture officer, our CMO, she's got her master's in marketing. I mean, we just really Peter invented the iMirror, which is just amazing. But really putting people in place that long term could help us build a business, and that was intentional. And I'm so fortunate that the community is really just like, okay, we're gonna chill and wait, um, because you know the way that we want to approach this is 5 years down the line. I want to be selling product inside the space, outside the space, at retail, and just a crypto native blockchain born apparel brand, right? And service, because like I said, we can just like Jax. So Jax is your typical contemporary brand, right? They've got their main label. They have several other labels. They have private label that they
mm.
produce for Costco, and this. We want to do the same thing.
It's the
We're
same. Yeah.
and we're doing that today, right now, with the brands that we're working with, and laying the foundation for what I mentioned, a moment ago, that 5 years down the line, we can have brand equity, not just in Web3, but brand equity as a brand and, in the contemporary market.
What do you think, out of all the different ventures that you've gone and executed against, what's the biggest difference with Clubhouse Archives and what you're doing today versus any other business that you've done in the past? Like, what is there like a defining
Oh
thing
my
that
gosh,
still
there's so
gets you
many
out of bed?
differences. This is the slowest, most calculated,
Mm,
that I've been. I mean, and I'm 45 at this point, right?
You look incredible for
I've taken my shots. So I've been punched in the mouth, to say the least. So I my biggest regret in past businesses was not having that team set up in the beginning,
45.
right? And that was the thing that I promised myself that I would do right this time, right? Make sure you have, not to say those other businesses weren't successful, but they weren't as successful as they should have or could have been. So for me, it's about having that team in place. We are doing a raise. We're going out on a capital raise, and I'm talking to VC. Everything is in place for that to be successful, but without that team in place first, then it's doing what I did in the past. You just go out and raise money, and then you're like, oh, we're gonna go hire a team. That's not what I wanted to do. So I found individuals that were willing to buy into the vision, be patient, and we have traction already. We have clients that we're working with. So this is kind of the first time I'm doing it that way, right? Where I'm going in with the traction, I'm going in with the team. The plan has been flushed several times over in the past year and a half. The industry has changed, as we know,
Mhm.
right? We're actually seeing now membership NFTs, loyalty NFTs. When I was preaching this back in last October, a year ago, right? It was when I first started being vocal about this. Actually, I think it was November. People were like confused by what I was telling them because it wasn't a PFP drop. They were like, I would get in these spaces, be like, you gotta rework this whole pitch. We're like, we don't even can't even follow this. And they were, for most accounts, right, because I didn't even really like I understood, but I understood why they didn't understand too. I was like, this is like, they're
Yeah.
like, all right, so wait, we buy this and then next week I could sell it for double, like, because that's all they knew at the time. And I'm like, no, you buy this and you're in the club, and you get discounts and you get special product, and they're like, yeah, I don't,
So how do I make money?
yeah. So wait, what? Um, so yeah, it's been interesting. The biggest differences are probably the the patience and calculation, I think, that went into this.
That's so rare. Like not only in Web3, but just in any business, right? Is the patience factor, right? I mean, like that, and that's great to hear that like you're putting people over product, right? Essentially, like build the team first, set up for success, and then go execute because the product will follow. Like,
Yeah, I was just gonna say that's the thing is, and that's what I'm so glad that our community's been patient, because look,
mm,
we're supposed to develop this sweatshirt and everything else. I'm just trying to get everything, because the product for me is the easy part. That's the easy part. And I always would jump right into that, and then everything else was like, yeah, we'll get to that. And then it's like, no, dude, that's your infrastructure. That's your business.
yeah,
If that's not sound, and the product is, eventually that's going to catch up to you. So I'm really trying to solidify the infrastructure in a way that I just hadn't in the past. And that's not to say that I've been doing that for 2 years. Like I said, it took 6 months just to write the plan,
mm,
and that plan was flushed over a few times. And I really didn't start being vocal about this until, like I said, last November, right? So this is really technically only 11 months in,
mm,
and we really didn't start selling any tokens until July, right when right in the
right, yeah.
lowest point of the bear, which is like,
But hey, if you could make it out of this, dude, you can do it.
yeah, which we will, and we're expecting our membership to be full sometime in this coming year. We're going to we're going to sell product to the space. We're going to sell product outside the space. We're going to service brands, once again, inside and outside of the space. And it'll be a business. I mean, and it's going to be kind of surreal in one sense, because we don't even really consider ourselves, we don't use the word NFT on our website. I don't know if anybody goes to the clubhousearchives.com, they'll notice it's more digital collectible. And
Mm.
we've been doing that now for a few months. And once again, that narrative is now finally catching up and changing.
Everybody's using it now.
Yeah. And so, but we do a space on Fridays, as you know, and I actually started that. What you don't know, I started that back in February, and I only stopped for 30 days. Yeah, so Stack came on, I think, like in like August. to revive it, but I'd stopped it for 30 days. Before that, I was running that for way back to February, and I was, it was almost more of a pontificating platform where I would just sit and preach all the things that we're saying now.
And get feedback.
Huh?
And you get immediate feedback.
Yeah, and it was more to like, I wanted to understand where people's heads were at.
Yeah.
And open their eyes to different, business models within the space. And what I learned in that is, I used to say like, eventually NFT will go away because it just has to, right? There's way better examples today than I was giving. The best one that I've heard recently was, we used to say MP3, and we don't ever say it. We just download a song, right?
Yep.
We just
Just a
call it a
song.
song. We call it what it is, right? But it's like, oh, I've got my MP3 player. I've got my, I'm gonna download an MP3. And that's probably the best example that I've heard of recent. We'll get to a point to where people are just gonna be like, yeah, I downloaded this digital collectible shirt, or
Yeah.
I like it, or whatever. There'll be a term, right? And that's it.
What just for the listenership, what James is referencing, they do this amazing Twitter space. If you're on Twitter, definitely get on Twitter, because that's where a lot of the market is shifting, especially with Elon buying it. So I assume it's actually going to bring more people onto Twitter. But they host this beautiful Twitter space every Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern time, called Fashion Fridays, with James and his co-host Stacky. So they do an incredible job. It wasn't this past Fridays, but the one before was just so like, I'm like, man, I wish I was able to like participate, because it was such a good conversation. So anybody
was that the one where we were talking about G Money and we were going through? Yeah,
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
That's like, we try to do current events mixed with fashion. So every week it's not just like,
It's got to be a balance.
Yeah, there's got to be a balance. I mean, with Elon taking over Twitter, I mean, how can you not talk about that?
100%.
And I agree with you. I think he's going to onboard a lot of people. I mean, we know a few more that are coming back on.
Yeah.
So I have a feeling that's going to bring some people for sure. But I think he's going to also introduce probably crypto payments and things like that. Like it's going to make it interesting. Oh yeah,
sure. James, I have a few more questions for you, and then we'll wrap it up. What has been when you look back on your career right now, and like, you still have a whole nother lifetime ahead of you, like we're still super young and you're going to go and execute amazing things. When you look back in the past 20 plus years, what has been your biggest accomplishment?
Oh wow, that's a tough one. I've been very fortunate in my life to do some really cool things. I mean, I walked on the Florida State when they were at their pinnacle, and I got to play there and be on the field, or in the stadium, I should say. I didn't play that game, but for the national championship, which was awesome.
Oh, wow.
Got the rings and did that whole thing. So that was great. My biggest accomplishment in the space, though, for me was probably at Jack's, I think, was, I remember sitting down the first day, and he said, we've got to figure out how to bring this from a $20 million business to a $40 million business. And we executed that in a couple of years. When I left the business, it was that. So I felt accomplished, and it was kind of neat to like look back on that conversation, because I remember thinking at the time, I'm like, how the hell are we going to do that? And we did it, so that's an accomplishment.
What did it take for those listening, right? There's a lot of younger people, designers, creatives listening. What's something that like you had to do, whether it was mentally or physically execute, that really like allowed you to do that? I mean, you're talking about $20 million.
It's distribution. It's just understanding distribution and understanding how to achieve those kinds of numbers. That's not selling at mom and pop boutiques. Like you need the department stores behind you, and then you need to do private label business, and it's diversifying the revenue streams. That's one of the most important things that I've learned over time. If you put everything into the label, it's a very it's a much longer uphill battle. But if you've got the label and you're producing for other individuals that are supplementing that revenue, right? If you do have the opportunity to do diffusion labels, lower end labels that you can put in other places, all of that helps, right? Private label with department stores and things like that. So I would say that my biggest advice, other than going from 20 million to 40 million, just in general, is become a student of your space, right? Whether that's Web3, whether that's apparel, whether that's any business, read books. Like, and if you're not a book reader, like a physical, then go online and do the research. But
Right.
like, sit and learn. If there's something you don't know, that's not good especially if you're in charge, right?
Mm,
Like if like if there's like, well, I'm weak at, financials. It's like, well, then you better learn. Or you better hire somebody to teach you, because if you don't really understand fundamentally, like on the profit and loss side of the business, like what's going on, you're dead in the water.
yeah.
So I became a student of, I mean, it took 23 years to say that I you know have a better grasp of the entire thing, and I'm still learning, right? We're all still learning. Um, but that's my best advice, right? Get in there and learn the things that you don't know. If there's anything that makes you uncomfortable, that's what you should be concentrating on, because you
Mm,
don't want to be uncomfortable in anything. You want to feel very comfortable on the whole gamut, right? I'm not saying you need to learn how to be the CMO, but you should have an idea of what they're doing.
100%.
If you don't know about SEO and things like that, like that's just all things that I'm like, all right, I don't know. Let me read up on it. Let me learn. So when they're doing it, you understand what they're saying, and you can at least have intelligent conversations.
Do you block off like a part of your day to like just do research or like
Well,
learn?
like I said, like I told you, for the past how many years now since I was in New York, I've been getting up at 5 in the morning. That's never stopped. Oh, I'm sitting in this desk, and this is my home office, but I'm sitting here every day at 5:45 to 6 a.m. I'm sitting in this chair, and I'll get done usually like 7 o'clock at night. So it's
Yeah,
like,
that's what it takes.
yeah, no, that literally, especially today with everything going on, and Web3 is a whole nother layer of business. So it's kind of crazy.
Business and education. Two more questions for you. The first one's
Sure.
easy. One, where could people find you? Clubhouse Archives, do you have a website, Instagram, Twitter?
Yeah.
You personally, how do people follow you? Like,
Yeah, I'm not
plug
worried about
away.
them following me. I prefer that they pay attention to business. They can always get to the business. Theclubhousearchives.com is the website. At Clubhouse ARCNFT is our Twitter handle. That'll probably change, but that's where it is today. And the Clubhouse Archives is our Instagram. Yeah, I would say check us out and
I'll plug it
learn
below.
more about what we're doing. Go ahead.
Definitely highly recommend it. Ever since I was introduced to you, I've been watching, trying to join the Fashion Fridays. I love it. Like that. I know Friday at 5 p.m. is tough, right? Like people are
Tough.
just fucking done with the week.
It's funny. It's tough, and I was like, oh, we're gonna get murdered in this time slot, but we've been averaging a few hundred, all the way up to I think 1,500 showed up for that space 2 weeks ago. So people at the end of their day, they're like, sure, I'll relax and listen in the background,
Sure.
and maybe it's their drive home or whatnot. But yeah, it's been a great space.
Last question for you, James. This is something that I started last week actually with a guest of a podcast that hasn't come out yet. I used to ask a different question and kind of religiously end the show, but like I'm really just a super fan of giving people flowers while they're still here, right? And if you follow Gary Vee, he does that too.
Yeah.
I would love to ask you, like, if there's one or two or three or five or seven people that like you would want to like put a spotlight on or give flowers to, like who's helped you along the way. You mentioned that person in your first business is really like that consultant who's helped you along, but who's somebody who you would give your flowers to?
I'll give flowers to my team right now. The team that I've like Charles Coe, he was the founder of Alpha Girl. He's our COO, and Peter Bokoff is our CTO. I mean, all these are incredible individuals. Steve, NFT Bark, who's Steve Kaczynski, he's our Chief Cultural Officer. Gia Batillo is our CMO. She's incredible. Lakos, the glitch bird and Web3, he's our strategy officer. And then Zach Hurley is our Chief Sourcing Officer. All incredible individuals. And the reason why I'm giving flowers to them is they have agreed to come along with this journey until it really gets to a point to where it can sustain itself. I mean, they're really here for the passion and the vision, right? And that's tough to find people that want to come along on those types of journeys with you. So I'm giving flowers to them for seeing the vision and staying along my side to help me build this thing out.
That's amazing. I'm super stoked with that answer. And definitely for all those people, if people are interested in doing their homework and their research on Clubhouse Archives, go look at all those profiles because they are amazing. They are on your website as well. So James, this has been incredible. Episode 73 of An Untold Narrative. Thank you so much for coming on, spending time on this Sunday. I know you're going to get some family activities in, but
Sure.
thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk about this today. And whenever you want to have me back, I'd love to come back. And if I can help in any way, please let me know as well.